All right, let's welcome in Ryan Easterling, Illini Inquirer, breaking down some football recruiting with Illinois, of course. Going pretty well right now is Illinois after getting Nasir, Rankin, and King Liggins last week. Now is the number 9 recruiting class in the country. Not often we've been able to do this. So we'll break down Nasir and King Liggins and get Ryan's thoughts on them. But Ryan, I think it's always good for us who've been covering this for a while to kind of zoom out and kind of look at what is Illinois football recruiting right now. So just what do you kind of make of what Illinois is doing in this class of 2026 right now?
Yeah, it's a good time for a reset. I mean, look at the numbers. They're well into the double digits, which hasn't always been the case in the past. We touched on that last time, but they're striking while the iron's hot, and they're doing a great job in state. I think there's been a lot of legwork done to get them where they are at this point, and to be able to have the success now and see the fruits of their labor over the course of 5 years start to pay off is really, I think, exciting for them. It's validating that they stayed the course and didn't veer. I mean, they have relationships all over the country, but Bielema didn't just say that he was going to recruit the state when he took the job a few years back and then not do it. He's stuck to it even when it wasn't necessarily yielding results early on, or yielding as many results early on. And now you see what they're doing, landing the guy who is 2 spots nationally away from being the number 1 player in the state in a guy like Nasir Rankin.
Yeah, so Ryan, like we have seen coaching staffs make efforts. I thought Tim Beckman made a very good effort in state. Obviously, the wins and the just kind of the thought of what he was as a coach was way different than Ron Zook going anywhere and sell anybody. Ron Zook recruited this state really, really well. Kind of went away from it, focused on Florida, which I know a lot of in-state coaches didn't love, but Ron Zook never had a problem getting talent. It was mostly about winning with that talent. But then Lovie Smith, his first recruiting class was really promising in state. But then a year into it, I think it was right after signing day, he fires Josh Sternquist, who was director of recruiting at the time. And you're like, well, what's going on here? And they just pivoted away. They went more towards Texas and Florida. And obviously by 2020, they didn't have a single in-state prospect in that class. So why do you think with Bret Bielema, it is working, that they are getting some top 10 in-state kids like Nasir, Rankin, Malik Elzy, Caden Fagan? You want to get more, of course, but they're also just getting a lot of these Power 4 prospects in state. Why do you think that's working with Bielema?
Well, I mean, you already said it. Wins are a big piece of that equation. But if you look at it, the competency with which this program is being run is really a hallmark. I mean, Bielema just understands how to run a college program. I think that was one of the things that Lovie Smith had a lot of challenges with. I think it was something that Beckman probably had some shortcomings on, even though he was largely a college coach. But you just see Bielema as the guy that understands college, and he's been willing to pivot and get some of these player personnel roles and get Josh Whitman to invest in these roles that are really critical as the landscape of college football changes. I don't know that Bielema was necessarily a big fan of the transfer portal when it came out, but he rolled with it. He adapted, and you're seeing that he's being successful by being adaptable and rolling with what the current college football landscape is. And they've been willing to make changes. He's been willing to accept reality of what things are, but without changing his identity and without changing really what he firmly believes in. And so I think it's been a combination of those two things that's really gotten them where they are now.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think he has adapted the transfer portal. Like 2023, I don't know if he was aggressive enough. Like, I think that really impacted his roster. Like, his roster wasn't deep enough, wasn't quite talented enough after losing all those guys to the NFL. The last 2 transfer portals, they've been very aggressive and really filling out their roster, attacking depth, and also not being afraid to get some stars and go to the Power 4 level and get some players. And then I think in state, I think early on, they were doing some outreach and maybe taking some players that now I don't know if they would take in state. But now that they are staying true to who they are, but prioritizing in-state kids. They're not going to take everybody. They're not going to evaluate everybody the same as their peers, even in the Big Ten. But they are going to do their due diligence. They're going to have honest conversations with all of those coaches. So I do think it's been fun to watch, how they've gotten better and the sell has resonated more, but how Bielema has actually adapted to certain things in college football as well, because now he's got something to sell. Now he's got some leverage in these conversations where it's like, hey, you should want to be a part of this. And I think that's what is really interesting about King Liggins here is this was a Big Ten battle that they probably don't win a couple years ago, Ryan. Even obviously Nasir Rankin's probably one of those as well because USC and Lincoln Riley certainly would have been a heck of a sell 2 years ago. Wisconsin, Illinois wasn't getting the Catholic League defensive lineman then. Now they are. It's really kind of a good time to kind of reflect on how much this has moved forward in 2 years.
Yeah, and so much of it too speaks to the depth that the program has. They don't have to reach nearly as much as they used to. They can be a little bit more, I don't want to say exclusive, but they can be a little bit more particular or selective with the guys they're going after. But yeah, I mean, in the past, they wouldn't have gotten the time of day with half these guys. I mean, maybe a few if there was like some sort of special connection there, but they've got legitimate prospects who are legitimately interested in them now. And a lot of that is because of the product that's on the field, but also the way they've run the program and the fact that they've stayed committed to recruiting the state.
Yeah, and that's why it feels like if you can follow up Nasir and King Liggins and Tony Bologna and everybody they have so far, Jacob Alexander, if you can get JC Anderson with that as well, because that is the tier now. Like we knew Bielema the last couple of cycles could get these Power 5 prospects, win some Big Ten battles. But if you can win the Nasir Rankins and JC Andersons, that takes you to a different level of recruiting, right? And I think when those guys do it and he can sustain some success, and that's why this year is so important for Illinois is to show you can sustain it, not just go 2022 to 2023 and not make a bowl game. It's continue to win and be a winning Big Ten program. But if you can get a couple of those more star level, 4-star, top 247 prospects, that resonates with future classes too.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and good players want to play with good players. And so the more you continue to raise the bar, the more you increase that standard, the product on the field in theory is going to continue to get better because not only are you getting better prospects, but you're able to develop those guys. They've done a great job of developing some guys that maybe weren't the most hotly contested recruitments, but they were still good players. But you pair that now with these guys that are on a slightly higher tier, and you can only take them. You can take them even to another level. And so when you talk about a guy like a Nasir Rankin or a JC Anderson or some of these other coveted guys, it's just they start at that much higher of a level. And so being able to develop their players the way they have really across the board, even getting good contributions out of some players that maybe nobody expected, I think really says a lot about this program. But the fact that now they're in these conversations and able to get guys that have that higher ceiling just creates greater potential for the program.
I just had this thought before we get into these individual players, Ryan. I would caution people, like, I don't think Illinois is going to all of a sudden be a 15 4-star prospect team, even if they get to a college football playoff, right? Like, I still think there is a part of their identity that is underdog, that is that tough, smart, and dependable. That, listen, they got all top 1,000 prospects now. These are really talented players, and they're all, they average 12 Power 4 offers each recruit in this class. So it's not like they aren't getting really, really talented, good players that other schools want. But I still think there's going to be that level where he still wants these hungry kids. He still wants some underdogs in this because that's part of the DNA. And that's kind of what a lot of successful programs that have kind of risen in the Midwest over the last several decades, Iowa, Wisconsin, Kansas State, programs like that are kind of built around. So I still think there's going to be some of that DNA. And I think that's a healthy thing for a Bret Bielema program, especially.
Yeah, I think you got to be really cautious too with some of the recruits because there are some guys that can come in and feel entitled, and I don't get the sense that they tolerate that at all. I think they want everybody that's going to come in to work. They want people that want to get better, but they want to work to get better. The word culture really gets abused sometimes, but honestly, it's true though. Like they've set this culture, and you can see it in the way that all the players interact with one another, the way they support each other, but the way they work towards a common goal and have this chip on their shoulder. That they want to prove the doubters wrong. I mean, look at Luke Altmaier 2 years ago, super quiet. Now he's out there kind of like, taking jabs and things like that. And his attitude has changed. But I think so much that's because he's been influenced by that culture that Illinois has to go out there and work, become a leader. And you see guys in other position groups that are functioning as leaders, not only just like vocally, but the way they work. I don't think you want to disrupt that. And so Bielema is going to be very careful with the chemistry of this team and the complexion of the team. And I think you're still always going to see that element of the underdog because, I mean, at the end of the day, he was that guy. He was the underdog coming up. And I think he sees the value in it. He also kind of maybe has a soft spot for the underdog too.
Yeah, and he's an underdog that's confident, right? Like he breeds that. So Luke's kind of reflecting his head coach there. The other example I think I would use is Michigan State, right? With what Mark D'Antonio did, they kind of had this, blue collar mentality, rising up in the Big Ten like they did when Michigan was down, right? And I think what lost that program at D'Antonio is they're taking a lot of higher ranked prospects and maybe sacrificing a couple of the things that got them where they are. So I would always be careful about that. And I think Bielema is. I think he's established enough to do that. And guys like Nasir, Rankin, JC Anderson kind of fit what he wants, I think, from those kind of things. So moving forward, Nasir Rankin, obviously a very talented player, top 100 prospect, shows the Illinois hat after flying 5 hats around. Ryan, if you got any thoughts on that, you can. But USC obviously was in there. A lot of really, really good programs. Nebraska made a run into here as well. What do you think makes him worthy of a top 100 ranking and all the hype that is going to come with that?
I mean, his athleticism is off the charts. He's not a skinny guy. I mean, if you look at him on the basketball court, you can almost see it a little more clearly. He's pretty well built, and he's a guy that can take contact, but he's so explosive and he's so elusive with the ball in his hands. He's kind of a game breaker type guy. You get him in space and he has the acceleration, the top end speed, and the physicality to take the ball to the house anytime he gets a hold of it. And so, when you get a player that's that special, has that kind of vision, even though he's such a highly rated player, he's got that underdog mindset because he even said it all the times he's been told no, he wanted to prove people wrong. And even when you're that high of a rated prospect, to have that mindset that you never settle for where you're at is really valuable. And I think that's the thing that is going to help propel him as he takes on this challenge of potentially playing 2 ways, potentially playing 2 sports. We'll see how that goes. But I mean, he's not going to be denied. He's not going to just resign without trying.
Yeah. And I have doubts about that. So you can call me a doubter in a couple of years if he's playing both sports or both ways or whatever, because those things are really, really hard. But I love that he wants to do those difficult things. And it's a kudos to Illinois that they're allowing him to pursue those things and at least try those things here at Illinois. But he still chose Illinois because of the football program, right? Like he still chose Illinois because you look at his final list of schools, Duke, North Carolina, I think of which coach is going to be there the longest, which coach has done the best job recently of producing wide receivers and offensive talent in the NFL. And Illinois stacks up pretty dang well outside of a couple of years of Lincoln Riley. He's obviously done really well with quarterbacks and some skill players, but that program has struggled the last couple of years, including their first year in the Big Ten. So being close to home on top of that, it made sense to me, Ryan, why Nasir Rankin would think Illinois was the best spot for him, because I saw what Isaiah Williams did in this offense. And while last year was more of the outside guys with Zachary Franklin and Pat Bryant, those guys lined up in the slot sometimes too, and they found ways to get those guys open. I think Barry Loney is very creative, and Justin Stepp has a very good history now of developing NFL receivers. When you put Treylon Burks and Cortland Sutton and now Pat Bryant, Xavier Legette, all of those guys, that makes sense when you list the pros and cons for a guy like Nasir Rankin of why he'd pick Illinois. And that's kind of crazy. Like we are now at that point where it's like, yeah, Illinois was the one that made the most sense in this kind of race.
Yeah, and I think they did a great job of showing him how he would be used too. You don't always get that with other programs, and it sounds so elementary, but Illinois is really intentional when they bring these recruits in to say, hey, this is where we envision you fitting into this program, not just, oh, we're going to get you the ball. It's, hey, they show them film. They say, hey, we envision you doing things like this. You said it. Lunny can be very creative and use a multiple weapon like a Nasir Rankin in a lot of different ways, whether it be reverses, end arounds, move him inside, outside, because he's got the size to do both. Now, the other thing, too, is even though this receiver room is getting more and more talented, I still think there's a path to early playing time for him. Now, I don't know that was necessarily the biggest factor, but I don't think there's anything that's a major obstacle that would get in the way of him getting on the field and at least getting some action his freshman year. They'll find a way to use him just because he's too special of an athlete not to. I mentioned it before he committed, but I honestly think he could be an awesome special teams returner too, just with that vision and that open field speed and change of direction that he has. But I have a hard time keeping him off the field as a freshman just because you bought the car, you want to take it out for a ride.
Well, Hank Beatty will be graduated by then, right? So you
Mhm.
talk about both receiver in the slot, but also special teams. He might be competing with his former high school teammate Tyshawn Griffin, who's got some cat-like quickness, not quite as big is Nasir. I think the acceleration is a different level with Nasir too. But like, yeah, there is a path to some early playing time in that kind of slot competition with Colin Dixon, who's going to be very, very established by that point. But yeah, I think he's definitely going to be in line for that. King Liggins. This is Terrence Jameson's best defensive line class. I mean, especially when you think of the in-staters they've added here. Tony Bologna, who had 18 Power 4 offers. Now King Liggins, 18 Power 4 offers. Parker Krim had 4 Power 4 offers. This is by far their best. But what stands out to you about King Liggins and what his eventual impact could be?
Oh, he just moves really, really well at his size. For a guy that's 6'3", 280, he's kind of, or probably growing even still. He's probably a little bit more than 280 where we have him listed. But he just moves really, really well. He's got great lateral quickness along the line, great long arm. You can tell too, like anybody that plays at Brother Rice, they're just well coached. Like it's rare that you find a lineman from Brother Rice that isn't technically sound. Just for years and years, they put out great linemen. They value great line play there, and you see that on his film just because he's technically sound, but he's got a lot of quickness. He's got a lot of power, especially out of his lower body. He's worked really hard the last 2 or 3 years to really build his body up from being below 200 pounds to now in the upper 200s. But he's still got that quickness and that burst to get into the backfield. He can move laterally along the line to shed blocks. He can fight off guards and centers and get into the backfield. And that disruption only creates chaos, gets players off schedule, and gives opportunities for other guys to get home to the quarterback when he doesn't.
And Ryan, you and I know it's hard to keep these kids at home because there's the supply of Power 4 Big Ten defensive linemen just is greatly lower than the demand. So to win these kind of battles, and it's going to take 2-3 years to pay off, right? Because it takes time for these guys to develop. But you got to keep stacking this type of talent. So when you're stacking this type of talent on top of Demetrius John and Angelo McCollum and Isaiah White and Cameron Brooks, that's Big Ten defensive line. Like that's what you need year after year is adding guys like this.
Yeah, that depth is really important. And plus, I said this too, with all the depth they've added, that keeps guys fresh at the end of games. When you really need to get home, you need to make a play. Because if you're not getting any pressure on the quarterback late in the game, it's gonna be tough. And then you're asking a lot of your corners. So having real depth along the defensive line where you can rotate guys in and out, face different fronts. You've got a lot of versatility. We've talked about the versatility that all these different prospects and these different players bring to the roster now, but it gives them different looks and it keeps guys fresh at the end of the game when they really need to get some pressure.
All right. Official visit weekend is coming up June 6th through the 8th. They have 9 commitments visiting. Ryan, I love when they do that. Gets these guys together, gets them around other top priorities. But this time of year, like you see Kenyon Alston receive a Michigan offer. Obviously, Javari Barnett is getting recruited heavily by Alabama, and you got to hold on to him. But one of the most important parts now is holding on to your prospects through December. That is a long time. I think Illinois has been pretty good at this, but they do lose 1 or 2 every year, and you've already lost 1 here in Vic Singleton. I just love that they do that. I think that's really important, Ryan. Something that we might overlook when you're adding all these guys is now you got to keep them for a long time with the early signing period being just 6 weeks ahead of this normal signing period. I'd love for that to be late July, early August. And I think a lot of coaches would too.
Yeah, I mean, you're always worried, and you always have to keep recruiting your guys because you're worried if somebody's going to come in and get stolen. But I think, as we kind of touched on a little bit earlier too, they do a really good job of building community within these classes, and then eventually they carry that community over to the roster. But having this many guys there, especially with some key visitors coming in town, it's really good for them just building camaraderie, building connections, but also having those guys there to help sell. I mean, the coaches are going to do their part to sell. The staffs can do their part to sell. But ultimately, I think one of the things that's been a real big key for Illinois over the last few years is having those other commits function as additional recruiters. And now that they've got so many on board early, they've only got greater capacity to sell the program. They get them around all those guys to me, that influence can play a big role and potentially get some guys to pull the trigger.
Another part of that I hear from people is you got the parents as recruiters too, of other parents, like on those official visits. That is huge. Like that plays a huge factor in creating that family atmosphere as they talk about. All right. So we know of 5 uncommitted visitors that first weekend of June, 6th through the 8th there. Running back Nelson Wheeler out of Omaha, Nebraska, same school as Landon Bonsager in the offensive line commit in this class. Tight end Will Vala out of Downers Grove North. We talked a little bit about him last time. The DBs, AJ Marks out of IMG Academies from Detroit. Nick Hankins, DB out of Belleville West. Obviously, Illinois got a pretty good one out of Belleville West about 7 years ago now, Keith Randolph Jr. And then a Texas kid, edge rusher, Tucker Ashford. Obviously, Archie McDaniels played a role there, and the outside linebackers coaches have gotten involved. So give me your first one that interests you the most here, Ryan, of these 5 guys.
Well, I think the one that interests me is Nelson Wheeler, just because Illinois has a running back commit, but it really seems like they're already preparing as if he's basically going to be out the door and go to Bama or somewhere else. He's got it.
There's urgency with Nelson Wheeler. Getting him on campus now before Javari Burnett is he's scheduled official at Alabama on the 20th. So the fact that they're getting Wheeler in now tells me there's a little urgency.
Right. And I mean, Bielema's policy is if the guys end up taking a visit somewhere else, then it's pretty much out. So, but I like Wheeler, and it's interesting. So I went and looked at his huddle, and I didn't realize they had some additional numbers on there, but we've talked about his 100 time. He runs like a 10.7. He actually puts a 10.6 on his huddle, but I think he's got a 10.7 verified. Yeah. But he's 5'9", shade under 190. So he reports a 4.47 40. A 4.31 shuttle, a 39-inch vertical, benches 315, squats 455, deadlifts 505. Like, for a guy that size, those numbers are ridiculous. Like, and he can just fly. You watch his tape, he's kind of a one-cut guy. Once he gets in the open field, he's gone. So he's a guy that's interesting. Alan, I think, talked about him on the podcast last week and said these guys might be due for a ratings bump. But you watch that tape and, man, the guy can go.
So a little Fergie Ferg in there.
It's a little bit. It's a little bit of that. It's a little bit of I'm trying to think who else. Who was the running back for the New Orleans Saints years ago? Or Darren Sproles. Yeah, I see a little bit of that too, because I think he can be versatile and catch a little bit. But yeah, get him out in space, get him in the flat, let him fly.
Yeah, it's just there's a breakaway speed there. That is clearly been what Thad Ward has prioritized here, Ryan, because, I mean, he took a running back room that had a bunch of big dudes, Josh McCray, Jordan Anderson, Caden Fagan. Obviously, Aiden Lawfrey has now become one of those speed guys, but since he's hopped on board, he's had a Khalil Valentine, John Forster, Cedric Weiss, and now he's going after Wheeler. Barnett's got breakaway ability. He's a little bigger, reminds me a little bit more of Forster, but Wheeler, yeah, I don't think he's going to be breaking many tackles, but he can break some tackles in space, and that it's going to be hard to catch him. So he's an exciting playmaker for sure.
Yeah, I mean, and he has that versatility that you can use him in a few different ways. But another guy that could potentially compete in a return game because that speed is just so good that it's really hard to adjust angles if someone's coming at you that fast. Yeah. So that'll be interesting to see with him. Like I said, I think the writing's kind of on the wall there with Barnett, and the fact that they are getting Wheeler in this quickly tells me that they probably want to try and get this closed down sooner than later.
We talked about Vala, obviously JC Anderson and Max Sutter are their priorities. They've prioritized those guys. They went and saw them on the last day of the contact period. But Vala's a really good prospect in his own right. I think they take 2. So it seems like it's an Illinois-Indiana battle. I know Purdue has been involved. Sounds like Iowa could get involved. If Iowa's involved in a tight end, I feel pretty good about that evaluation. So Illinois gets the first official visit. I would try to push and get that done because I still think he's a really good prospect, even if he's not named J.C. Anderson or Max Sutter. A.J. Marks, I think they're in a good spot for him at IMG Academy. Corey Parker knows him really well from their days in Detroit. Tucker Ashford, really good edge rusher prospect. Kind of reminds me of Leon Lowry, who they got now. Got some length to him. I think he can play that Fox position because he's got some explosiveness. But Nick Hankins, it's been a quieter recruitment. Like, it's Missouri, Illinois, Tennessee. He's visiting Missouri this week. Always worry about Missouri with these St. Louis area prospects. But Illinois is really involved there and obviously really in the mix, Ryan. And if you could have had a kid out of this, Metro East, out of Belleville West on top of what you've done in Chicago and what you're trying to do in Central Illinois in this class, that'd be representing the state pretty well. And he's a really, really good prospect.
Yeah, he's got good size, but Belleville West is one of the Metro East programs where Illinois has always had some pretty consistent traction. Going into East St. Louis is always tough because you're up against Missouri and pretty much every other SEC program. They've got plenty of great guys, but Illinois has had some success at Belleville West. And so, to get a guy like Hankins that's got those ball skills, that size, and I think they need another cover corner in this class. Like, you always want to be stacking corners because you saw last year they had a few guys get banged up, and having that depth there is really important because you don't want a big drop off if one of your guys goes down. So good size, good speed, great athlete, and another in-state guy. They've been pushing hard in-state. They've been prioritizing in-state. He's got a solid offer list. They'll have to compete to close that one out, but I think he is probably among the in-state guys not named J.C. Anderson. Probably one of the highest priorities remaining.
Yeah, they only got one DB in this class. They've loaded up on DBs previously, but with Singleton now at Texas A&M, like Amir and Thomas, I'm a big fan of as a prospect, but they need some more DBs in this class. And kind of looking outside of A.J. Marks in that St. Louis area with Nick Hankins and Jacob Eberhardt, who's at Kirkwood in St. Louis. So really trying to get into there, Ryan. And we know that's where Lovie Smith did pretty well, but it's difficult because that is SEC country. But, man, if they can get back in there with Thad Ward, who's got a lot of experience there, Archie McDaniel's been working in that area, and obviously Terry Hawthorne rejoining the staff doesn't hurt. And they've done well in East St. Louis. And Melvin Priestley, obviously playing pretty well. Brandon Henderson has a starting job. JoJo Hayden is making an impact. So they do have some examples there out of the Metro East especially where guys can come in and make an impact. Yeah,
it's just that it's a tough area to get into because you are in somewhat of that border of the SEC country, and especially with Missouri now in the SEC as of a few years ago. So it's always a hotly contested area. But getting guys out of there, yeah, they've had some success. I think part of Illinois' prior success there had something to do with Corey Patterson. He had a lot of relationships in that area, and they were able to leverage those. But nowadays, it's going down there and just they can sell the success on the field. They can sell the product they've put together. And I think there's great opportunity. They've had some really good DBs in each of these classes, but like you said, there's still spots in this class, and they could really use another one opposite Almirian Thomas.
All right, they did add a JUCO prospect in the class of 2025, a late riser here, Donovan Turner, who's committed to an FCS school before Illinois got involved. UMass bounced back, went to the JUCO route for a year, had a really, really good year. Ryan, you said you took a look at him. What were your impressions of him?
He's a physical player. He's a big body. Probably could play a little bit of nickel safety if he really had to, but he's another one of those guys that's got that underdog story. They just love that. He's physical. He plays downhill. Coverage skills probably need a little bit of polishing, but I mean, he's played a lot of college ball, and that experience is going to be really valuable. But yeah, you look at his tape and like the first 2 or 3 clips, he's laying the lumber. So having that physicality is really valuable. And then mentioned it just a bit ago, but that depth is really important. Last year they had some guys go down there. They're playing a little bit thin at DB, and having an experienced player like that to go along with Torrey Cox and to go along with Jaheim Clark is going to be really, really valuable because they need that depth to be able to stay fresh, stay multiple. If they're playing against a team that has bigger receivers, a bigger body like that helps with the matchup. And so, yeah, I like the ad. It was a position where they probably needed to add another guy if they could find the right fit, and kind of excited to see what he does with the opportunity.
Yeah, and he reminds me a lot of Caleb Patterson. Big physical, how sticky is he in coverage? We'll have to see because having a big body like that, but big physical, I think he could be a really good backup there. And if somebody goes down, you feel like he can come in and compete. I know we get really excited about what Tanner Heckel or Amar Reynolds or, Tywan Cox even could be going into next year, but I think Illinois is learned, and again, 2023 is probably a good example of this. Like, if you can add depth and upgrade depth and experience, Ryan, you go and do it. And they were very aggressive this spring. Offensive line, they add not only Aiden Knappich in the winter, but now they go and get Tyler McMillan out of SEMO. They go and get Knappich's little brother, Nathan, long-term guy, but just more offensive line bodies that you feel like can compete. And then at tight end, Christian Abney, you get out of Ball State, you like his film, and we're excited about what Cole Russ could be. Could Jordan Anderson play a role at tight end? But it's like, you still don't know what those guys are. Like Davin Stoffel, they add. We still don't know what they are. So adding competition, adding depth, because you don't want to have to go down to a redshirt freshman who's just not physically ready to perform. So I loved how they attacked, depth in especially in the offensive line and in secondary and tight end this spring, just to make sure, like, if you want to compete for a college football playoff, Ryan, you can't have many questions in that 2 deep. Like, yeah, as long as we stay healthy or that freshman is ready, like, not a lot of college football playoff rosters are doing that.
Yeah, you can't really bank on everyone staying healthy and everything going right.
Yeah.
Look at tight end last year. Cole Russ goes down in the spring, out for the season. And that puts a lot of strain on the rest of that roster. Now, they got some okay production out of the tight end room. They got Carson Goda, Tanner Arkin had solid years.
But Carson Goda was an important addition in the spring.
Right.
Torrey Cox, huge addition in the spring last year.
Yeah, and it just goes to show, though, they need those pieces. Like, they were really fortunate for the most part along the offensive line that they didn't have any guys with serious injuries. They were able, because they didn't run a very deep rotation. And so having additional depth, basically having an actual 2 deep at every position where guys are capable of going in and playing and they're not a liability is extremely important, because that could mean the difference between a win and a loss in a game. Because if you have a guy in there that's a liability, or a guy that's not at the level of being able to play in a Big Ten game, maybe it's just because he's young, or maybe it's because he's not as talented as your starter. But to have that actual 2 deep is extremely important.
All right, before I let you go, just what are your expectations going into this year for Illinois football?
Are you looking for like a number?
I just like what do you think is a successful year for Illinois football? Like, just what do you think of this roster going in with that schedule? So yeah, if you want to throw in, I don't know if it's a number, but like for me, I'm like, if this is a 9+ win season, I feel great about it. If it's an 8-win season, I'm like, okay, maybe you didn't maximize it, but that's still, to me, sustaining success, because usually the great year has been followed by a bad year, right, for Illinois football. So I think the expectation should be high. I think people should be dreaming of 10+ win season, a college football playoff, but I don't think it's Bret Bielema might disagree with me, but I still think for the long term, if you're winning double the amount of games you're losing this season, that still feels pretty good to me long term.
Yeah, especially relative to recent Illinois football. But yeah, I think the expectations need to be high. I mean, the potential is definitely there. They bring back 18 starters. Like, that alone in this era with the transfer portal is very rare, because you're not having to reteach a bunch of new faces. Sure, you've brought in some key additions, but your core of your offense, defense, special teams, for the most part, is still here. And they're building on the momentum of past years. They're building on their progress that they made in past years. And so that, to me, is huge. I want to give kind of a vague answer. I'm going to say just don't take a significant step backwards. Like, you might have a couple games that don't go your way, but
unlike last year.
Right. Yeah, they had a few that definitely went their way this past year, and that helped along the route to 10 wins. But yeah, I mean, if you get 8, I think you still feel okay about that. But I think there would be a lot of people in the program, especially in that facility, that would feel like 8 wins would be underachieving with what they have. I mean, I think the expectation is playoff, which is crazy to talk about with Illinois football. But they've got the potential. They've got a schedule. Now they've got to win a couple of those early games. Like, Duke is a big litmus test game for them. Indiana, you see if they can replicate what they did last year. There's probably less of those James Madison guys on the roster this year, but those 2 games I think are going to kind of set the tone. So it's going to be really important to get off to a good start, because I think if you don't get off to a good start, or you maybe falter early, it's going to be really easy for some doubt to creep in, and they don't want to have that happen. And so take care of what you take care of, play good, clean football. And I think they could be well on their way to at least a 9-win season.
Yeah, I thought the numbers that are out are the over under in Vegas is 7.5. I'd go over that.
Yeah.
I think the floor on this team is pretty high as long as your quarterback stays healthy. Um, I think the S&P Plus numbers, Bill Connolly had 8.7 wins for Illinois. That's just his computer spitting out what they have, their schedule, all that. That sounds about right for me. Like I would have the over under at 8.5 for Illinois. And I think anything over that would be a great success. Even if you fall short because one game didn't go your way, or you lose a game you don't think you're going to lose, but you win one maybe you didn't expect to win. I still think that would be a great success for me, even if you don't match last year's win total, because 2 years of that kind of winning in the Big Ten, it's not easy. It is not easy to win that stuff. But I agree. Like I think people should be dreaming. Like I think your expectations should be high, but it's hard for me to sit there and go, yeah, if Illinois goes 8-4 and makes a really good bowl game in Florida, like that's a bad year for Illinois. Like maybe I got to adjust my mind for that, but I'm like 3-4 years away from that, right? Of sustained success of that.
It's a little bit of recency bias, right? But yeah, I mean, I think the goal, and Bielema's not going to settle. Like he's always going to be pushing the threshold and trying to raise the bar. Yeah, I mean, and the other thing too is this team just under Bielema has found ways to win very unlikely games. Even when their backs are against the wall, they just find a way to win. Now there have been a couple games like Indiana a couple years ago, like 2023, where they found a way to lose. Yeah. But for the most part, they've played really sound football, and sometimes they've gotten a little help. But they've played really sound football at the end of games and done what they can and done what they needed to do to come away with a win.
I trust them in the fourth quarter, which is weird. But that happens when you have veteran experienced teams, but also you got the quarterback, right? And now he's got to do it without Pat Bryant, who is kind of the clutch player, but Isaiah Williams was before him. It'll be fun to see who steps up in those kind of roles. But I think the biggest area of growth, Ryan, for me is first and second down, running the football and stopping the run. Like if they improve in that, this team could be really damn good.
Yeah, and they've got some offensive linemen that I think are
NFL.
Yeah, they've got some NFL guys. J.C. Davis is a stud, but I think they've got some guys that are coming up through the ranks too that you're going to start seeing in the rotation that could really help accelerate that run game too. Because they've got some guys that have sat behind some other players, and now between them and some of the transfer additions, I think they can really improve what they do up front because they'll have more depth, they'll have more like better conditioning, better strength. So that all plays into it. And so if they can win the battle up front, that's really going to help them this season get off to a good start. And I mean, if they get off to that hot start that everyone's hoping for, might be the year they get game day. Who knows?
Yeah. And you parlay that into some 2027 recruiting that could be on fire. So top 10 recruiting class right now, people thinking 10 wins. Ryan, we've never covered anything like this.
What is this Illinois program that we're looking at?
The expectations through the roof. Love it. It's fun to talk about. That's for sure. Ryan Easterling, Illini Inquirer. Thank you, buddy. Appreciate it.
Thanks, man.